So I was married in 2009, not for the first time. I met my husband doing something called contra dancing, which is basically a form of American folk dance. It's community social dance, and it was brought over here in like the late 1600s and still survives, mostly in New England. So we're at this dance, and I come across this man in the line. We dance in long lines of couples, and instantly the sparks were flying. Now, we were both partnered with other people, okay? So it's like, who is this guy? He feels so great in my arms. He's a fabulous dancer. Oh my God. Okay, so we start having this conversation. And when you're contra dancing, the way that you have a conversation is really fractured. It happens in like 10-second and 30-second sound bites as you're moving along. So there'd be these little bits of conversation, and it would go something like, so, you know, where are you from, and what do you do, and who are you, right? Oh, he says, I'm from a small town of about 300 people in New Hampshire. And right now I'm a dairy farmer, and I used to be a goldsmith, and I had my own jewelry store. And I'm like, wow, I'm from New York City. And nice Jewish girl, contra dancing here in New England, and I'm a psychologist. Okay, so we had conversations like this for about a year and a half. We would see each other a couple of times a year at a particular dance, and every time there would be this ba-boom kind of magic, and the same conversation would happen. And finally, I went over to a friend of mine and I said, who is this guy who smells like cow shit and cigarettes? I want to know more about him. So she tells me more about him, and I'm really intrigued. And I'm intrigued not just because of the physical connection, which was really obvious, but the sense of connection had more to it than that. And I wanted to know more about that. So one thing led to another. We started spending a lot of time together. We were no longer partnered with our partners of the time. And I learned that he came from a Scottish background. And of course, I was Jewish. And he began to be really interested in Judaism. So his interest went from casual questions to reading an occasional book to buying out used bookstores, whole sections on Judaism. He was studying and then talked to a rabbi and then converted. There's a concept in Judaism. It's called tikkun olam. And it's a Kabbalistic concept, and it translates as repairing the world. What I learned about my husband is that through his Christian and then Buddhist and ultimately Jewish incarnations, he had always been repairing the world. And for me, in my work as a psychologist especially, repairing the world is a focal point. It's a way that helps me to see purpose and meaning in the world. So we got married on top of a mountain, on a farm in New Hampshire, with the cows mooing in the background during the ceremony. We were wrapped in his talit, and we had our hands bound in his family's tartan. So we were bound every which way but up. And after that Scottish-Jewish ceremony, we kind of waltzed off into the sunset, two people in their mid-50s, with lots of wishes, hopes, and dreams. Almost exactly a year later, in 2010, my husband showed me this enormous rash on the back of one of his legs. Enormous meaning it went from the middle of his thigh to the middle of his calf. It was the color of really dark red ketchup, and it had weird bumps all over it. And I had never seen anything remotely like it before. A few weeks after witnessing the rash, there were really weird symptoms that were happening. Not just aches and pains kinds of symptoms, clips, clips, but also symptoms that were like forgetting words or getting lost coming home. Forgetting a conversation that we had had 5 minutes before. We were having experiences that felt remarkably like the movie Groundhog Day. And although we were joking about it, it was getting really scary. One thing led to another, and my husband was ultimately admitted into the ER in our local hospital, and with that came a diagnosis. So the diagnosis was acute Lyme disease and chronic neurological Lyme disease. Now, what that means is that this man had been bitten by ticks for years of time and had never been diagnosed, and so had never been treated. Every time he had taken antibiotics for some other kind of bug, he was in effect self-medicating. And at some point, the point being the most recent tick bite, his body just couldn't handle it anymore. So, since 2010, my husband has endured all of the ups and downs that go with having a disease that nobody believes is real, that is incredibly controversial in the medical community. It's a political hot rod, and for which there is no cure. The kind of symptoms that happen aren't just the things that you often hear about, which are arthritic aches and pains in the joints. But when it gets into your central nervous system, the kinds of symptoms are things like loss of motor control, a lot of cognitive impairment, things that look incredibly like multiple sclerosis or Lou Gehrig's disease, which is part of why they call Lyme the great imitator. And so, for example, we could be walking down the street enjoying an art exhibit, and all of a sudden, one of my husband's legs decides not to function. And I don't just mean like, okay, drag the leg and it hurts. It doesn't hurt. It simply won't work. Things like that would happen randomly, do happen randomly, and they're really, really frightening. So at one point came the question, how do we go on together? This is still a young marriage. How do we go on? How do I go on? I've become the caretaker. I am caretaking emotionally, socially, and financially. My husband voiced concern about the burden that this was placing on me. I mentioned that I've been married before, so I know something about how to leave a marriage. I could leave this marriage, but I haven't. Asking oneself this kind of question, should I stay or should I go, is certainly one of the most difficult questions you can ask in a relationship that you've put all of your wishes, hopes, and dreams into. And maybe there isn't one answer for all time, meaning the question, I think, gets re-asked periodically. But when I really looked hard and long at myself, what became clear to me is that no matter how much Lyme disease has stripped away from my husband, and therefore from our relationship, and it has stripped a lot, there are certain core things about who this man is that are present and accounted for, that are tangible, and I see it every day. And so sometimes when we're dancing, there are these bursts of energy, especially if he's having treatments, and it's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. That's the guy who smelled like Kaushin cigarettes. Yeah, I remember what it feels like to be in his arms, and it's so wonderful. And then there are other times when we're dancing, and I'm kind of holding him up, and he's there in our community and doing what he loves and sharing it with me. So that concept of tikkun olam, it's active in my marriage every single day. And I think that what we do is repair each other a little bit on a daily basis. And that's how we stay together, with a lot of patience and a lot of love. Thank you.